Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. Today we are here with Laya Reddy, kind of like Princess Leia. We were talking about that. And she is a student at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and a policy and communications coordinator at the Civics Center. So it's really great to have you on the channel. Thank you so much. I understand college life can be a little busy. We all are these days, let me tell you the truth. But let's dive into these questions, shall we?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So just for our viewers, talk a little bit about your background. Touch on what you're studying at GW, how that's preparing you for any roles you're going to take, any aspirations you have, kind of who you are, but not too long, because we do have to answer some other important questions. Take your time.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me here. So just a little bit of personal background. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, and like you mentioned, I'm now studying at the George Washington University, majoring in political science and music. So on my political background, I'm sure we'll get into it later in the interview too, but was interested in political issues without identifying them as political issues since I was pretty young, but definitely, as for many others, the 2016 election was a big time to learn more and get more involved. And since then, I've been really committed to civil rights and in particular voting rights. And that's what most of my work has been focused on. So with that, I've been involved with Democracy Matters, which is an organization committed to election and campaign finance reform. And I've also been working with the Civics Center, which is a nonprofit focused on youth voter registration and civic engagement. And like I mentioned before, I'm majoring in political science, so I think there's a pretty direct correlation there between my major and my career path. So I'm getting the opportunity to learn a lot more about communities that I didn't get to learn about in high school or in elementary school, which has included classes about people of color and women of color. So I'm really excited to take those classes and to be a better advocate for those communities. And as I said, I'm also majoring in music. I play trumpet, and I know that sounds pretty unrelated to politics, and I also thought it was unrelated when I joined college and started, but I've taken so many really interesting music history and music culture classes now, where I've gotten to analyze like how politics interacts with music. And through that, I've realized how much inequality and inequity there is in the music world too, which is something that I've grown up with. So that's another thing that I really want to tackle in the future is getting rid of those, obviously. So yeah, that's just a little bit about my background.
That's pretty cool. Music, interesting. Yeah, I can see some intersection of music and politics, especially jazz. Who doesn't love, a nice jazz song? Shout out to Louis Armstrong. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm glad you're working with the organizations you are, especially the Civic Center. Of course, it's one that I'm aware of. Their work influences many institutions around me. So yeah, that's very cool. And on that same note, kind of discuss your role at the Civic Center, and what you do for them, what you're hoping to accomplish, where do you want to take that? Is voting rights kind of the central issue you want to focus on as a career path? And then why? Give me the, why are you doing this? That one thing I always ask everybody.
Yeah. So also preface this just by saying, for the rest of the interview, any views that I express are my own and not the Civic Center's or any other organizations I'm affiliated with. But with the Civic Center, I've been, as I said, it's an organization focused on high school voter engagement and voter registration. And so my work with the Civic Center has been primarily focused on engaging with schools and school districts. And so one of the big projects that we've been working on this year is focused on the school districts in Los Angeles County. So at the beginning of this year, we sent out public records requests to all of the high school districts in LA County, which is the most populous county in the country. And we wanted to find out what they were doing to both comply with election education codes in California, but also just in general, what they were doing to support their students in their civic engagement efforts. And we found that most of them weren't doing that much. And we also found that the school districts that were doing more also had higher registration rates among their 18-year-olds. So with that knowledge, we moved on to a second public records request after providing them with several resources to see what they had done since our last public records request. And that's what we're now analyzing and going through our findings for. But we're really hoping that once we get involved with these schools and school districts, that they can take action and provide effective support for their students, because high school is the best time for young people to get registered. Once we're in college, if you go to college, it's really scattered. It's very hard to get these young people registered because there's just less focus on it. So really focused on high school there. And I think you were asking what drew me to this and voting rights in general. So voting rights, like I said, it was 2016, and it was actually because I was making calls to family and friends to get them to vote. And a lot of my responses that I was receiving were, I can't vote because I'm not a citizen. And that was, both a question that had sparked in me about immigration in general and the citizenship process, but also about how many people just didn't have the right to vote. And that got me into researching other communities and finding out about how in most states, incarcerated people who are currently in prison cannot vote, and in many, people who are just incarcerated or previously incarcerated also can't vote. And even when they are legally allowed to vote, there's still communities that can't. Like there's fewer polling places in communities of color, and there's less trained polling officers at those places. And so just learning about all these different barriers to voting, even when it was technically legal, really inspired me to take more action and to actually address these issues head on, because voting is powerful, and it really, it just doesn't make sense that you can't have a voice on these things that are still affecting your life and legislation that's affecting you. So that's definitely what drew me to it. And I think just as for the actual work, I think organizing is such a powerful tool in mobilizing. So that has definitely just inspired me to continue in that way. And I've also, worked on campaigns before, and I think that's also valuable. But right now I'm committed to political organizing that's not necessarily on campaigns for now.
Very cool. As a campaigner myself, I'd have to disagree. But
Mhm.
I have worked in the advocacy realm. I've worked in nonprofit realm. I I do a lot of shit. But this isn't about me. Remember that. No, I'd have to add uh, that when we discuss voting rights, there are so many barriers to entry at simply many collegiate levels. Like sometimes you need to get it notarized. You need to have the president there with you, or signing off on your mail-in ballot or some shit like that, right? Uh,
Mhm.
and when it comes to high school, as a high school student, I can tell you, I'm the anomaly, the outlier, doing all this crazy stuff. But most teenagers simply are apathetic towards politics. Is what I get from even my own friends. They're in some ways emotionally unresponsive. There's no real care. So the one thing I would say is that we need to collectively kind of give them issue-based, advocacy and issue-based reasons, like reasoning, justification to vote. Because people won't vote until they themselves are being impacted. At least that's how I did it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I would have to disagree with that. I think that young people are really passionate about these issues. And I'm sure, yes, I think that's a very common idea that like young people are apathetic or they don't care. And that's why we don't need to focus on them when they're voting, or even that low youth voter turnout is because they don't care. And that's not true. Actually, one of the things we found at the Civic Center is that low youth voter turnout is a result of, or at least low voter registration among young people can be connected to low youth voter turnout. And so I think it's not that young people don't care, it's that we're not giving them enough opportunities to engage and to actually to vote and to register. Because I think young people care and young people are affected by these issues. So yeah.
Yeah, I just think some of them don't know they're affected by those issues. Some adults I encounter don't know that
Mhm.
it's the local people that are making their decisions. It's kind of why I'm such a big proponent of introducing the youth vote. It's happened in where I live in the Bay Area. It's happened in Oakland. It's happened in Berkeley. It's happened in Maryland. Um, I think 16, 17-year-olds should have that right to vote because it's a habitual factor, right? It's like teaching the ABCs. It's the only analogy I can ever remember. It's like they taught you the ABCs in kindergarten. They teach you to vote a little earlier. I'm sure you'll keep rehearsing it. Um,
Mhm.
but no, I definitely have to agree. Now let's talk about 2020. Obviously, you were activated in 2016, I guess, presidential elections. But what are some lessons you learned from the 2020 election? Very historic, pandemic, wherever you want to take it, whether at your role at the Civic Center or beyond, academically or personally. What are your thoughts on 2020?
Yeah, one of the big takeaways was just the power of organizing. It's obviously there was the actual election itself, and there was organizing for that, but there was the Black Lives Matter organizing last year, and there was organizing around teachers and getting them the protection they needed, and around doctors and nurses and the equipment they needed. And so, but also obviously the political organizing too for the election. And that's just, it's really powerful. Biden owes his victory to those organizers in states like Georgia or in Arizona, where obviously I'm from. And so I think that was a really powerful lesson for me, because it's there's voting and there's also organizing, and those are both very powerful tools. And the other thing, which I'll just emphasize continuously throughout this interview, is like young people. Young people had higher numbers, higher turnout numbers last year, and they're still pretty low. But like, I think the increase is really telling of
Right.
what we
I
can
gotta
create.
we gotta wait for those NSOL numbers to drop. Um,
Mhm.
for the 2020 elections. I keep saying this in every other interview, but it's like I'm trying to have Nancy Thomas, who's the director of NSOL, will come on the show and kind of explain the new numbers, but just in promo. Do continue.
Oh yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, as I was just saying, yeah, I think young people are powerful, and young people, we need to give them more opportunities to get involved, because there's a lot that we care about and there's a lot that we can do. And I guess the last lesson that I kind of learned was just that, like, the fight's never over. There's so many issues that we need to address. There's so many things to be done. And having a different person in office and across the country to address these issues is good, but we need to still continue working towards it as individuals and organizing.
Yeah, no, I believe it. Organizing, I think they should have like an organizing class, not like organization that's
Mhm.
separate, but we should literally have education policy that helps people become organizers. Stay nonpartisan, but give back. I guess community service, public service. I know that's a requirement at some schools, but just a thought. Folks should really learn what it's like to vote, learn the procedure of voting. How many youth do you know actually go to the polls before they're actually legally able to vote and actually learn, this is how I turn in the ballot. Oh, can I use the screen, or do I have to use paper? When can I be registered by? Because same day registration isn't in all states, right?
Mhm.
Luckily, it's in none.
Yeah, I think that points to the importance of lessons on civics and government in high school. And obviously, those aren't like organizing classes, but there's a lot you learn from those. And planning a drive in your school, a registration drive in your school, can teach you a lot about organizing. Or even like a teacher offering their support, or taking a workshop themselves and learning how to do that. I think those are all things we should be learning in high school. I agree.
Yeah, no. Oh, high school. Got some thoughts on that. Now I'm gonna ask you a very simple question. It's really like a yes question, but if you answer no, I'll be really intrigued. Um, is voting important?
Yes.
See, simple question,
Yeah.
guys. It's a no brainer.
Mhm.
Apparently, everybody has the same answer these days.
Mhm.
But no, please do elaborate on that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, voting is for sure important. And I think my reasoning has, since I was able to vote, has been because so many people in my family couldn't, because were not citizens. And so realizing that so many people couldn't and I could, I felt like it was my responsibility to cast my ballot and to continue to do that, for as long as I can, because it's as much I each voting should be a right, but right now it feels like a privilege, because so many people don't have that right. And so I just feel like I need to be voting, and I need to give I need to work towards getting voting rights for other communities so they can also do that, because it impacts not only the people that we elect, the legislation that's passed and that has direct impacts on our lives, especially in local elections. So that's another thing. People are often focused on like national and maybe even state elections, but your local and city elections are also maybe even more important, because those have more direct impacts on your
I've
life.
been
But
saying that for like 2 years. I kid you not, because
yeah.
having worked in within municipal, county, even sometimes state advocacy, like, you know, I've said this in previous episodes. The president is focused on larger agendas. Senators are focused on larger countrywide issues, maybe sometimes even international and broadly macro domestic issues. But um, your mayor is deciding, your city council is deciding your city's budget, your school board is authorizing the curriculum and the textbooks and what gets funded at your school. Are there SROs or are there social services offered? The DA is handling most of criminal justice reform. The sheriff is imprisoning black and brown people if you live in a community that has that, criminal justice issue. It's not the national leaders. The national folks may amplify the issue. They may agree with it. They may disagree, but it's really somebody who could be your mayor or your neighbor. So
Mhm.
literally, um, they live within your community. So those
Yeah.
elections need to be emphasized. I think more so. If I were to choose, I'd rather vote for my mayor than vote for the president. That's just my thought. But no, vote for all of them. Don't leave any of them blank.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, no, I'd have to agree there. Uh,
Mhm.
now, obviously, we want to expand the right to vote, but the current majority in many conservative states recognize the power of youth, like you mentioned. They're trying to keep their majority now. They're imposing, harsh voting restrictions, voter suppression tactics in, minority communities, like you mentioned, all across conservative states, Georgia, Texas, even more. The other day there was an assault on abortion, like a whole bunch of crazy shit's just happening these days. What are your thoughts on how young people respond? Being a young person yourself, being politically active, what do you do about it? And what can we do about
Yeah. So there's so many different things you can do, right? Like I think there is value to genuinely just educating yourself more on these issues, because in order to get other people involved, to mobilize and to later on organize, you need to know these issues. You need to know what's happening. You need to read the news, and then you need to be able to tell other people about it. And so that's one thing, is just reading and or watching, learning. Um, but the other is, yeah, I think going to marches or protests or calling your representatives or lobbying, or voting, right? There's so many different avenues to express your views, and to, kind of take your power back. And those are all uh, hopefully accessible. I know they're not, but I hope those are accessible to young people. And those are all things we can take advantage of.
Yeah, no, I'd have to say voting's not the silver bullet. Attending a protest, as much as it signals your solidarity, it only really historically it has had a pronounced presence because let some legislation came out of it. There was some result. There was A plus B, and we got C. In some cases, and then C was probably not reapproved like 30 years later, and there's a whole bunch of pendulum swishes. But that's just history. Um, I would recommend to every single young person to vote. And if you truly care, like we believe young people should and will and do, um, then get involved more, like transcend, learning, transcend, spreading awareness, and do it. Just do it. Just like be Nike. You know what I mean? This is not. I'm not sponsored by Nike. Although if Nike wants to sponsor me, hit me up. Um, but yeah, no, I do concur, Doctor. Famous line. And now, just to wrap up, what is your quintessential advice for Gen Z? I don't know where they got Z from. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, really, they would just like, let's go to the end of the alphabet. Let's just pick a random Z. Let's go with that.
Mhm.
Um, on how young people can get involved, make an impact on voting rights, learn, or maybe they're alienated, maybe they're exhausted. What is your advice to the youth of America and beyond? Whoever's watching this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is such a big question. Yeah, I mean, not to repeat what I've said, but I think, like, for me, one of the biggest turning points was kind of coming to college and learning about things and having new experiences that, like, that just didn't exist in my schools in Arizona, especially in history classes, right? And so it's so important to educate yourself on these issues and to just, meet people and hear their stories, because um, those can definitely shape your views and will give you so much more information and improve your outlook, I think. And so learning is important, and like I said before, organizing. And yeah, like you said, whether that's through voting or through going to a march or a protest or writing an op-ed on it in some newspaper or even just talking to your friends about it, it's so important to just learn and spread the word somehow. um, and through that, I think that's how we can effectively organize and mobilize and create real change.
Yeah. And I think the work that the Civic Center does, focusing on high school students, I think it's imperative. And yeah, no, uh, we need more organizations. We need more people involved, because the big money wins too often. But we are building a movement. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, no, on you, how can folks stay updated on the Civic Center and yourself? If you want to plug your socials, I'll have it in the description so folks can go.
Yeah. So I personally don't actually have any social media, but I will plug the Civic
What?
Center. So you can follow the Civic Center anywhere at the Civic Center. And high school voter registration week is coming up September 27th to October 1st. And we're offering free workshops every Tuesday and Thursday at 4:30 p.m. PT for educators and students to learn about planning a registration drive at your school.
Great.
And like I said before, like that's one of the a great way to organize and start your organization journey is in high school. So I definitely encourage you to sign up for those. You can sign up at theciviccenter.org. And yeah, you can stay up to date with us on our website or sign up for a newsletter.
You don't have a Twitter?
I don't have a Twitter.
All right, folks, that's gonna be the end of this episode. um, God, you don't have it. We'll talk about that off camera. Off camera. There's too many
Mhm.
emotions. But is there anything you want to add before we get to that?
Yeah, I just want to say like I said, I'm so inspired by the work that young people across the country are doing and these young organizers. And I'm inspired to work even harder. And I just want to say, keep up the work, keep up the great work, and continue to do what you're doing because I hope it creates change. But other than that, thank you for having me on. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, no, same here. But yeah, no, thank you for giving us your time, perspective. Yeah, college life is crazy, so appreciate it. And anytime you want to come back on the show, talk some numbers, talk some game, maybe get you a Twitter. We'll have to think about that. Take care.
Thank you.